Get ready for the big revival. The real estate revival, that is. Now on 77 WABC, your New York weekend.
Are you ready for the big revival?
It's Rand on Real Estate. Look out! With Greg Rand.
Welcome to the big real estate revival. This is Greg Rand, your host on Rand on Real Estate on 77 WABC. This is a real estate show about making money in real estate. It's about playing the market. And I have a guest with me today in the studio who knows how to do that better than anybody I've ever met in my life. Welcome, Paul Adler.
Thank you, Greg. It's good to be here.
Yeah. Paul is a real estate genius. He's done some fairly high-profile things and a gazillion low-profile things. And we're going to be focused on kind of having Paul fill us in on a couple of really interesting plays that he's made over the years, one of them fairly recently. And we're going to jump right in because the purpose of our show here is for listeners who are thinking about real estate investing. You might already be doing it, but I know there's lots of people in the world. I see them everywhere. I talk to them everywhere I go who want to be real estate investors. They know that wealth is built in real estate more than any other asset class in the world by regular, everyday people. They look out there in the world and they see the federal government creating a nanny state and squashing entrepreneurship all over the place. They see Wall Street, I don't know, what was it, last week they were stampeding off the cliff over some kind of a computer glitch, or was it Greece? They don't even know. All we do know is they stampeded off the cliff again, 1,000-point dive on the Dow, and these people are playing with our money. So, Paul, you got a contact from a client overseas who had a building on the waterfront of the Hudson River. He wanted to sell it.
That's correct. We had a client in Great Britain with a toxic industrial plant sitting on the Hudson River, located there for more than 100 years. And the great challenge facing industrial concerns and real estate investors is how do you take a heavily polluted property from black to white?
From black to white, so from polluted to clean.
From brownfields to greenfields to make this property repositioned and to create an adaptive reuse that makes it balanced for the 21st century.
All right, so this factory, give us the scale. How big of a piece of property was this?
This is a 15-acre piece of property nestled on the west shore of the Hudson River, and it had 600,000 square feet of buildings, 21 buildings comprising the 600,000 square feet, and all but one were clean. The 20 other buildings were heavily contaminated with PCBs, lead, volatile organic compounds.
So they had been this thing was operational for how long?
For 100 years, from 1898 until 1998. This was an active wire and cable factory. And it served Yonkers very well.
So now, back in 100 years ago, did they have like the river keeper out there making sure that that we were being environmentally friendly, or they were just literally dumping stuff into the river back then? They were dumping things, burying it into the ground. So this client of yours contacted you and said, "I want you to sell my building," which basically is the size of a mall on the side of the Hudson River, one of those big behemoth factories. And it was operational all the way until they contacted you, or had it shut down at some point?
They had just shut down just prior to contacting us, and said to us, we've begun the mothballing process of the building. We want to sell it. What can you do to help us?
Okay. So the obstacle here was the fact that the value of the building is almost irrelevant because it can't be sold, right? My understanding of environmental cleanup is that if you want to trade a piece of property, the new buyer, it's got to be cleaned up in that process. Is that right?
In fact, Greg, you're right. The value of the building was negative $400 million because of the level of contamination, the way in which it was contaminated, and the fact that there was no plan to clean it up. So it had a negative value, and the companies, everybody that was entitled in this property, had to keep it on their books because of Sarbanes-Oxley with some kind of reserve, because at some point somebody could come back to them and said, you're liable for this cleanup. So everybody in the chain of title was really quite nervous about this.
So if I try to relate this to everyday real estate, okay, people have seen factories, but a lot of people haven't been anywhere near them from a real estate investment perspective. But I think about my own town. I drive around, and I can name 2 sites in my town that used to be gas stations. They're now closed. They're fairly decent locations. I drive by, I wonder, why are these gas stations for 6, 8, 10 years sitting here vacant? Why isn't there an ice cream parlor in there or a dry cleaners or another gas station? Is there some relationship? I mean, is it one of these things where nobody can sell those environmental issues? They can't sell the property because it costs them so much money legally to clean them up, and the actual physical cleanup makes it just a can of worms you don't want to open up?
Well, a lot of people in real estate who've owned real estate and had tenants in their property or had a user on their property really think repurposing seemingly undevelopable sites, of the industrial past is something that they can't handle. And in fact, they can. Quite frankly, it's a lot easier to clean the property up. It's a lot easier to take a look at this property, assess the situation, and figure out how you're going to take it from a brownfield to a greenfield. It makes sense to do it.
So this property was basically a nightmare. A lot of people would pass on it because there's no way to even begin to know how to wrap your arms around a negative $400 million value. But you have a peculiar way of approaching a building. So walk us through what happened when you had the epiphany that led to the solution that we're going to get into in a moment.
Well, two things happen. One is when you take a look at creative reuse strategies, one of the things we first do, we go down, take a look at the building and say, what's the highest and best use for this property? I mean, for 100 years it was an industrial plant, but they're not building industrial plants on the Hudson River anymore. Everybody wants condos and they want to recreate on the Hudson River. So we had to take a look and see what highest and best use was, and often we find that value is created by a change of purpose, a change of tenancy, or just a simple new outlook on what this building needs to be or what it should be.
So you go in. It's interesting because full disclosure, Paul has taught me 3/4 of what I know about real estate investing over the years.
Oh, you're in trouble.
And the approach, the creativity that people can bring, that you can bring, and that listeners and people that read our upcoming book and talk to us on the blog, the people that we're trying to invigorate with this show to go out and learn how to be creative entrepreneurs in real estate, that question, you use the term creative reuse, okay, adaptive reuse. What that basically means is, what could this thing be that it isn't right now? Vision, what could it be? And it can be applied on so many levels, and we'll talk about it more in the next segment, different levels of where this creative reuse approach comes in. But the ability, people have an innate understanding that you can buy a piece of property that needs to be renovated, so it's got a physical upgrade that can happen. I mean, think of a 3-bedroom house. You redo the bathrooms and the kitchen, you've improved the value of that property, improved the rentability of that property by improving the condition of it. But the idea of changing the use of a property, taking a factory, and even if it was possible to turn it back into a factory, to clean it up and make it into a factory again in the future, you're still talking about a very limited value proposition when you consider the fact that there are other places up and down the Hudson where they've got condominium projects, luxury condominium projects. There's other uses, the parks and so forth that you talk about. Think about Chelsea Piers. Chelsea Piers was an adaptive reuse here in Manhattan of a pier, and a lot of piers just went to nothing on the Hudson River and the East River. This pier got converted over to an entertainment facility. So we're going to get back in a minute, and we'll fill you in on what Paul did, how he went about envisioning a new purpose for this property on the waterfront in Yonkers. And I think you'll be surprised. This is Greg Rand at 77 WABC, Rand on Real Estate.